The winter arrived in Silver Valley, Colorado, on a sharp gust of wind. It moved over the high mountain ridges and shook the pine trees that grew around Oak Ridge Manor. The house was built from dark stone, looking like it grew straight out of the mountain itself to fight the cold weather. Inside the building, the cold air found its own places to stay. In the main hall, a large fire burned all day, giving warmth only to the few people who walked through. In the kitchens, the air was hot and full of steam from the constant work of the cooks. But in the back halls and the dish rooms, the cold stayed completely still, acting like a constant friend to the people who worked in the dark. One of those workers was a young woman named Daisy, which was the only name she used now. It was a short name for someone who worked quickly and stayed out of sight. To the other kitchen workers, she was just a quiet girl who washed the plates. To the head housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, she was a useful pair of hands that never made trouble. To the master of Oak Ridge Manor, she did not exist at all, just a shape in a dark dress passing down a long hall. But to his young relative, a wealthy girl named Blair, Daisy was an object of constant dislike and mean words. Daisy knew exactly how to live in her small world. She spent her days in the washroom, dealing with hot water, rough soap, and piles of dirty dishes. She knew the layout of the big house by its back stairs and narrow halls, avoiding the grand rooms where the guests walked. She knew that Mrs. Higgins wanted her hot tea at exactly 6 o'clock every morning without any sugar. She knew that the kitchen boy was saving his small wages to help his family move from the East Coast. She collected these small facts to keep herself safe from the anger of the people above her. She never cried when Blair said mean things to her. She had learned a long time ago that tears only made her tormentor happy. Instead, Daisy made herself perfectly still, letting the harsh words pass over her without showing any feeling. She would hide inside her own mind, a place where she was not a kitchen maid with rough hands and a low gaze. In her thoughts, she remembered the smell of pine trees, the weight of a small bird on her arm, and a man's deep laugh. These memories were like old shadows, but they belonged entirely to her. The other servants often warned her to stay away from the main stairs during the night. They spoke in whispers about the master of the house, a man who had ruled the valley for more years than anyone could count. They said he was not like regular people, that he belonged to the night and held power over the cold mountains. Daisy listened to the gossip, but kept her thoughts to herself. She had too many floors to scrub to worry about the secrets of the stone manor. She only cared about finishing her work so she could sit by the dying kitchen for 5 minutes before bed. One night, the wind blew a heavy wooden shutter open in the pantry, letting the snow pile onto the floor. Daisy hurried to fix the latch, her fingers freezing as she fought the heavy wood against the storm. She did not notice the tall figure standing at the end of the dark hallway until she finished. The man stood completely still in the shadows, watching her with a quiet intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. She dropped her head immediately, holding her apron tight, waiting for him to tell her to leave. He did not speak a single word to her that night. He simply stepped back into the darkness, his long black coat trailing behind him like a cloud. Daisy ran back to the warmth of the kitchen, her heart beating fast against her ribs. She had never seen the master so close before, and the sight of him stayed in her mind. He looked completely different from the men in the town, carrying a strange stillness that felt older than the stones of the house. She resolved to be even more careful, promising herself to never look up from her work again. The next morning, the kitchen was busier than usual because more guests were expected from the valley. Daisy worked until her arms ached, carrying heavy iron pots from the stove to the big copper sink. She watched the other maids talk about their families, feeling a familiar loneliness settle in her chest. She had no family left, no home other than this cold stone manor, and no future beyond the next pile of dishes. Yet, as she looked out the frosted window at the gray sky, she felt a tiny spark of hope that things might change. The master of the house was Caspian, the secret vampire king who ruled the mountain lands. He was a tall man who looked to be in his early 30s, but his white hair and pale white skin showed he was something else entirely. His eyes were the color of a winter sky right before a heavy snowstorm, and he noticed every small detail in his home, He had taken over the estate 2 years ago after his father passed away, bringing a quiet mood into the stone rooms. He rarely spoke to the people who worked for him, spending most of his time out in the cold woods or near the large bird cages behind the house. His favorite creature was a large white falcon named Frost, a bird known for its wild nature and sharp talons. The falcon had come from a distant northern country and refused to let anyone touch it except Caspian. 2 helper grooms had already hurt their hands trying to feed the bird, and even Caspian had to be careful when he reached into the cage. One clear afternoon, Blair decided she wanted to see the birds because she was bored with her indoor games. She walked into the stone birdhouse with Caspian behind her, wearing a bright blue coat that stood out against the gray stones. "Look at him, Caspian, he is very beautiful," Blair said, stopping a safe distance from the high perch where Frost sat. "But he looks so angry all the time. Does he ever become gentle for you?" Caspian did not look up from the leather strap he was fixing on a smaller bird. "He is a wild hunter, Blair, not a pet for the parlor," he answered in a flat tone. "He knows his food and he knows his cage. That is all I need from him." Daisy in the corner of the room, holding a scrub brush and a bucket of soapy water to clean the stone floor. She kept her head down, trying to make herself look like part of the wall so the wealthy guests would ignore her. She could feel Blair looking at her with a mean smile, enjoying the fact that a servant was doing hard work near her clean clothes. Blair turned back to the pale king, taking a small step closer to the white falcon's perch. "Maybe he just needs a different touch," she said, reaching her gloved hand toward the bird. The white falcon watched her move, its dark eyes staying wide and its neck feathers rising in anger. It made a sharp, rough sound from its throat that made Blair freeze in place, her smile disappearing instantly. "Oh, he does not seem to like me at all," she said, stepping back quickly. "He does not like anyone," Caspian said, finally looking up from his work with his pale face completely still. "Get away from the cage." Blair laughed a little to hide her fear, and the group moved out of the room, their voices fading into the yard. Daisy stayed behind to finish scrubbing the floor, her back hurting from the low work. The birdhouse became very quiet, filled only with the smell of dry straw and the sound of feathers moving in the breeze. She stood up and walked past the long row of wooden perches, keeping her eyes on the wet stones. When she reached the spot where the large white falcon sat, she stopped moving. Frost was watching her carefully, not with the angry look he gave Blair, but with a quiet curiosity. She did not know why she did it, but an old song rose in her throat from her past life. It was a short, simple melody that she could barely remember from her childhood days in the woods. She began to hum the notes softly under her breath, keeping her body relaxed and her hands at her sides. The white falcon tilted its head to the side, its rough feathers flattening against its neck as it listened to the sound. It just sat there, watching her face with a calm expression that surprised her. A strange feeling came over Daisy, a deep sense of knowing that felt like a physical pain in her chest. It connected her to the old world she had lost so many years ago, a world her body had not forgotten. She stood perfectly still in the cold room, breathing softly, and keeping her eyes locked with the wild bird for 3 seconds. She did not realize that someone was watching her from the dark doorway of the storage room. Caspian stood there without making a sound, holding a forgotten glove in his hand. He had returned to get his item, and had been about to tell the maid to leave the birds alone. But he stopped when he saw the fierce white falcon grow quiet under the gaze of the kitchen girl. He heard the low melody she hummed, and saw the bird respond to her voice instead of fighting. It seemed impossible to him, since the bird hated everyone else on the estate. He looked closely at the girl, noting her small frame and her dark red hair pulled back tightly. He did not show himself, slipping back into the yard silently, but everything began to change for Daisy that day. Later that evening, the loud metal bell for the kitchen workers rang twice through the lower hall. Daisy hurried to answer the call, wiping her wet hands on her rough apron as she walked fast. She found Blair standing in the narrow passage, her arms crossed tightly over her fine dress. "The silver plates for the evening meal were not clean enough, Daisy," Blair said, her voice sharp and cold. "They did not shine the way they usually do when the master sits down." Daisy felt her heart drop because she had spent 2 hours polishing those exact plates until her fingers were sore. "I am sorry, miss. I thought I had cleaned them well," she whispered, looking at the floor. "You thought wrong," Blair answered, stepping closer with a mean look in her eyes. The head cook noticed a dark spot on the large serving spoon. It was very embarrassing for the family. Daisy knew this was a lie because the cook had been asleep, but she could not argue. "It will not happen again," she said. Blair looked her up and down with a small smile that showed she enjoyed the power she held. "Sometimes I wonder if your hands are just too rough for this kind of delicate work in the main house," she said. "Perhaps you would do better working in the horse stables with the dirt." She turned around and walked away, leaving Daisy alone in the freezing hallway. Daisy did not shed a tear. She simply turned back to the kitchen, picked up a soft cloth, and started cleaning the silver again. 2 floors above the kitchen, Caspian sat in his private study, staring into the bright red flames of the fireplace. The image of the kitchen girl and the wild white falcon stayed in his mind, refusing to leave. He was a person who believed in rules, clear facts, and the long history of his family line. What he had witnessed in the birdhouse did not make sense, and he was not a man to leave a mystery alone. The next morning, a special message was sent down to the kitchen staff. The order was carried by Caspian's personal helper, which caused a large stir among the women who worked there. The kitchen maid Daisy was to leave her dishes immediately and report to the birdhouses out back. She was being given a new job to help the head bird keeper, Mr. Briggs, starting that very hour. The news moved through the servant rooms like a sudden wave of heat, causing everyone to talk at once. Mrs. Higgins looked confused, and the other girls started whispering about secrets. Daisy received the news in complete silence, feeling a sharp fear grow inside her chest. Moving to the birdhouses meant she would be out in the open yard where the master could see her every day. It was the last thing she wanted, because staying invisible was the only way she stayed safe from trouble. Her mind raced with questions as she wondered if she had done something wrong or if Blair had ordered this to punish her. "Go on, girl," Mrs. Higgins said. "Do not keep the master waiting." Daisy bowed her head and walked out of the warm kitchen into the bright, cold air of the courtyard. Every step felt like she was walking toward danger, her shoes crunching on the hard white snow. Mr. Briggs, a thin man with skin like old leather from years of working outside, was waiting for her near the cages. He looked at her small frame with a doubtful expression, shaking his head. "You are the girl from the washroom?" he asked. "Yes, sir, I am Daisy," she replied softly, keeping her arms close to her sides to stay warm. "Right," the old man grunted, turning back to his tools. "I do not know what the master is thinking with this choice, but an order is an order. You will do exactly what I tell you to do. You will not touch any bird without asking, and you will stay out of the way. Your only job is to clean the wooden perches, sweep the stone floors, and change the water pans." "Yes, sir," Daisy said, feeling a sense of relief wash over her because cleaning was something she understood. She could use the work as a shield to keep herself hidden from view while she did her duties. Her new life began in the fresh air, with the clean smell of pine trees replacing the wet soap of the kitchens. She worked with the same quiet care she had always used, keeping her mouth shut and her head down while the birds watched her from above. She enjoyed being near the birds, watching the small hawks and the fast falcons as they moved in their spaces. The white falcon Frost sat on his high wooden pole like a king, his white feathers bright against the stone walls. He watched Daisy every time she entered the room to sweep the floor or change the water. Sometimes, when the old bird keeper went to the blacksmith, Daisy would hum that same short melody from her childhood. Every time she did, the large white bird would become completely still, watching her with his dark eyes. Caspian came to the birdhouses often, appearing without a sound like a shadow moving across the floor. He would lean his tall frame against a stone post, his white hair catching the pale light as he watched her work. He rarely spoke a word to her, but Daisy could feel his gray eyes on her during the whole hour. It was a heavy, serious gaze that made her nervous, as if he were waiting for her to show him something. She did not know what he wanted from her, so she worked faster. One afternoon, a week after her new job started, she was cleaning the large stone bowl that held the birds' water. Mr. Briggs had gone to town to buy more grain, leaving her alone in the quiet building. Frost became restless on his high perch, moving his feet and shaking his wings with a loud sound. Suddenly, the large bird let out a sharp cry and flew straight down from his pole, landing on the edge of the stone bowl right next to her. Daisy froze completely, her heart hammering hard against her ribs as she looked at the giant claws. This was the bird that had hurt the stable hand's arm only a month ago, and she was entirely alone with it. She kept her hands in the cold water and did not look the falcon in the eye, remembering an old rule from her past. She began to hum the soft melody again, her voice shaking slightly in the quiet room as she prayed the bird would stay calm. Frost watched her face, tilting his head from side to side as the music filled the small space between them. He took one careful step along the stone edge, then another, moving so close she could see the gray lines on his white feathers. He did not look angry anymore. He looked like he was listening to an old friend. Slowly, without thinking about the danger, Daisy lifted her wet arm out of the water, her thick gray sleeve covering her skin to the elbow. She did not push her arm toward him. She just held it steady in the air like a new perch for him to use. It was an action that came from a deep part of herself that she had kept hidden for 15 years. The whole room seemed to hold its breath as the white falcon looked at her sleeve and then at her eyes. The bird made a soft, clicking sound from its beak and then jumped lightly onto her arm, its weight solid and heavy. His sharp talons pressed through the thick cloth of her sleeve, but he did not grip hard enough to hurt her skin. Daisy stood like a stone statue, holding the most dangerous bird in the valley on her arm while a single tear ran down her cheek. "Do not move," a low voice said from the darkness behind her, making her freeze even more. Caspian had walked into the room without making a sound, his gray eyes fixed on the white bird. He came to stand right next to her, looking at the falcon, and then down at her pale face. Something changed in his expression, the hard look on his face softening for a brief second as he watched them. "What is your true name?" he asked in a quiet voice, so he would not scare the white bird away from her. "Daisy, your grace," she answered, her voice barely a whisper in the cold air of the birdhouse. He was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face as if he were reading an old book. He saw the clear shape of her jaw, her wide hazel eyes, and the small marks of dust on her nose. "No," he said with a serious tone that surprised her. "That is not your name." Before she could ask what he meant, he reached out his pale hand and gently touched the white feathers on the bird's chest. "Mr. Briggs walked into the yard then, stopping dead in his tracks when he saw the kitchen girl holding the white falcon. Caspian looked at the old man's surprised face and then turned back to Daisy with a serious look. He lifted his own leather glove, and Daisy moved her arm closer so the bird could hop over to his master's hand easily. "Give her a proper leather glove today, Briggs," Caspian ordered. "She will fly the bird with me tomorrow morning." The master's order moved through the servants' hall like a shock, causing everyone to stop their work to talk. A kitchen maid was going to walk the high mountains with the vampire king to fly his personal bird. It was against all the rules of the house, and the whispers followed Daisy everywhere she walked that afternoon. Some of the old kitchen workers said she was using magic to trick the master and his white falcon. Blair was completely furious when she heard the news from her maid. She caught Daisy in the small room where the boots were kept, blocking the door with her wide dress. "What kind of trick are you playing on the master?" Blair demanded, her voice loud and angry in the small space. "What did you do to that bird?" Daisy looked up, her voice staying steady for the first time in years. "I did nothing, miss," she said, feeling a new strength inside her chest since the bird had trusted her. "Do not lie to me," Blair shouted, stepping closer with her hands clenched into fists. "You are just a dirty kitchen girl, and that bird is a dangerous beast. You must have used some trick to make him stay still." Daisy looked straight into Blair's eyes, not backing away. "Perhaps the bird simply knows when someone is being real, Miss Blair," she said quietly. The words made Blair stop talking for a moment, her face turning red with anger. "Your talk will bring your ruin, girl," Blair whispered before she turned around and left the room, slamming the heavy wooden door behind her. The next morning, a neat brown box was delivered to Daisy's small room under the roof. Inside, She found a soft leather glove that fit her hand perfectly and a simple dress made of dark green wool. It was a plain garment made for walking in the cold wind, but it was brand new and clean. There was no letter inside the box, but Daisy knew exactly who had sent the clothes to her room. When she put the green dress on and looked in her small, broken mirror, she did not see the kitchen maid anymore. The girl looking back at her looked like the old memories she kept in her mind, someone who belonged in the woods. She walked out to the courtyard where Caspian was waiting with the white falcon on his hand. He gave her a quick look, his gray eyes staying on her new green dress for a second before he gave a short nod. "Briggs showed you how to hold him correctly?" he asked as they started walking toward the mountain. "Yes, Your Grace," she answered, taking the heavy bird onto her own glove as they moved past the gates. The white falcon settled down immediately, its grip firm and steady on her hand as they walked up the trail. They walked in silence for 2 miles, leaving the big stone house behind them as they climbed the high ridge. The wind was strong and fresh up there, blowing Daisy's red hair around her face and bringing a bright color to her pale cheeks. For the first time in 15 years, she felt like she could breathe deeply without fear. "The wind is coming from the west today," Caspian said, breaking the silence between them. "He will fly high." When they reached the top of the snow-covered hill, Caspian looked down at the empty valley below them and gave her a sign. Daisy used her fingers to remove the small leather hood from Frost's head, letting the bird see the wide sky. The white falcon let out a loud cry of pure joy, pushed off her glove with his strong legs, and flew straight up into the cold air. Daisy watched him go, her head tilted back as she smiled at the sight. "He flies well for you," Caspian said, standing close to her with his white hair moving in the wind. She looked at him, noticing that the cold weather made his pale face look less harsh than usual. "My father loved to fly birds like this a long time ago," she said before she could stop the words from coming out of her mouth. Caspian turned his head quickly to look at her. "Your father?" he asked. Daisy felt her face turn red as she realized her mistake, trying to find a simple story to hide her secret. "He was just a regular farmer on an estate near here, a long time ago," she said, looking down at her boots. Caspian did not ask more questions, but his gray eyes stayed on her face with a serious expression. He knew she was holding back the truth, just as he was holding back his own secrets from the town below. The White King's mother, Lady Rosalind, arrived at Oakridge Manor a week later for the winter season. She was an older woman with sharp eyes and white hair like her son, but she carried a kind smile that made people feel safe. She noticed everything that happened in the big house within her first day there. She saw her son's quiet mood, Blair's angry face, and the new job given to the little girl from the kitchen washroom. She sent a message for Daisy to come to the large library one evening, using the excuse that she needed help finding a book. The library was a warm room filled with thousands of old books, smelling of leather and dry paper, where Daisy had never been allowed to walk before. "Help me get that large book on the top shelf, child," Lady Rosalind said, pointing her finger toward a high wooden ledge. Daisy climbed the wooden ladder carefully and brought the heavy book down to the older woman's hands. As she handed it over, Lady Rosalind reached out and took Daisy's hand, turning it over to look at her palm. "These are not the rough hands of a kitchen worker anymore," the lady said, her voice quiet but serious. "They are healing now, but the marks of hard labor are still there under the skin." She looked up into Daisy's hazel eyes, her expression becoming serious as she spoke. "My son Caspian has taken a great interest in you, Daisy," she said. "That can be a very dangerous thing for a girl who has no family to protect her in this house." Daisy kept her voice low and polite. "I have done nothing to make him look at me, Your Grace. I only clean the birdhouses." Lady Rosalind smiled a small, knowing smile as she let go of the girl's hand. "I am sure you have not tried to catch his eye," she said. "That is exactly why he watches you so closely. Caspian is surrounded by people who always want something from his position, but you only want to be left alone in the quiet. You may go back to your work now, child." Daisy bowed and left the warm room quickly. That same night, Caspian sat by the dying fire in his study, thinking about the words the girl had said on the mountain. He opened a large wooden cabinet in the corner of the room, using an old brass key to turn the lock. He pulled out a thick leather book that belonged to his father from 15 years ago, determined to find the truth about the Pendleton family name that lived in his memory. He read through the old pages for 2 hours, looking past the notes about the horses and the woodlogs until he found a specific name. His father had written about his best friend, Arthur Pendleton, who lived on the estate next to Oak Ridge Manor. The note said that Arthur was a good man who had been falsely accused of a crime by mean men from the city, losing his land and his name in one day. The diary explained that Caspian's father had bought the neighbor's land to keep it safe from the dishonest men, promising to hold it in trust for Arthur's young daughter, Penelope Pendleton. The note said that the girl had been left with her relatives, the family of Blair, who promised to raise her safely until she was old enough to take her father's place as the rightful owner of the land. Caspian stared at the old paper, his pale hands tightening around the edges of the book as the truth became clear to him. The girl washing dishes in his kitchen was not Daisy. She was Penelope Pendleton, the true owner of the very ground he was standing on. Blair's family had taken the money meant for the child and turned her into a servant to hide her true name so they could keep the wealth for themselves. The next morning, Caspian found her in the birdhouse while she was putting fresh straw into the small cages. He walked up to her without his usual coat, his white hair bright in the morning sun. "Walk up the mountain with me today, Penelope," he said, using her true name for the first time in 15 years. Daisy dropped her broom on the floor, her face turning completely white as she looked at him. "Your Grace," she whispered, her hands shaking as she stepped back against the wooden wall. "My father's diary told me everything last night," Caspian said, keeping his gray eyes on her face. "You do not need to hide from me anymore. You are the daughter of Arthur Pendleton, and this land belongs to you." The silence in the room lasted for 3 seconds before she finally looked down at her hands. "My relatives told me my father was a bad man," she said, her voice cracking as she spoke the old secret out loud. "They said if I told anyone my real name, the townspeople would come to hurt me. They made me change my name to Daisy and work in the kitchen so everyone would forget about the Pendleton family." Caspian stepped closer, his pale face showing a quiet anger. "They lied to you to steal your home," he said. He began using her real name, Penelope, every time he spoke to her in front of the other servants at Oak Ridge Manor. Mr. Briggs looked confused, and the stable boys stopped their work to watch whenever the master called the kitchen girl by a fine name. Blair heard about the change within 1 hour, and a deep panic grew inside her chest because she knew her family's secret was coming into the light. Blair decided she had to remove Penelope from the house before Caspian could find more proof of the old fraud. She waited until Lady Rosalind went out for her afternoon walk, then slipped into the lady's bedroom silently. She found a fine silver bracelet resting on the wooden table, picked it up quickly, and carried it up the narrow stairs to the small room under the roof where Penelope slept. She hid the silver bracelet deep inside the pocket of the old gray kitchen dress that Penelope had left hanging on the wall. Later that evening, Blair ran down to the main drawing room with a fake look of sadness on her face. "Lady Rosalind, a terrible thing has happened in the house," she cried out. "I saw the girl Penelope coming out of your rooms today, and now your silver bracelet is gone from the table." Lady Rosalind looked at the younger girl with a calm expression, not showing any surprise. "That is a very serious thing to say, Blair," she replied. Mrs. Higgins was called to the room immediately, and a search of the servant rooms was ordered. Blair led the way up to the roof, pointing to Penelope's small bed with a mean smile on her lips as the housekeeper reached into the old gray dress pocket. The silver bracelet came out of the cloth, looking bright under the light of the candle Mrs. Higgins was holding. Penelope was brought into the drawing room to stand before the family, her green dress looking clean but her face pale with worry. "I did not take the bracelet, Lady Rosalind," she said, keeping her voice steady. "The evidence was put there by someone else," she added, looking straight at Blair. "How dare you call me a liar?" Blair shouted, turning to Lady Rosalind with fake tears in her eyes. The heavy wooden door opened then, and Caspian walked into the room, his white hair catching the firelight. As he looked at the group, he listened to Blair repeat her story about the stolen silver, his pale face staying perfectly still until she finished speaking her angry words. Penelope was out on the high mountain ridge with me all afternoon, Caspian said, his voice cold as ice as he told the lie to protect her. We did not return to the gates until 5 o'clock, long after my mother found her bracelet missing. So tell me, Blair, how could you see her in the house? Blair's face turned white as she realized she had been caught in a trap, with no way out. The room became completely quiet as Blair stood there without a word, her hands shaking at her sides. Caspian stepped toward her, his gray eyes showing no mercy for the girl who had tried to hurt Penelope. You hid the silver in her room because you are afraid of the truth coming out, he said. Blair sank into a wooden chair, her face covered in real tears as her power disappeared. We had no money left after my father died, Blair whispered, looking at the floor with a broken voice. My parents said if the master found out about Penelope, we would be thrown out into the snow with nothing. I was just a child when we started the lie, and I did not know how to stop it as the years passed. Caspian looked at her with pity before he turned back to the table. He pulled the old leather portfolio from his coat, spreading the papers under the lamplight for everyone to see. He handed Penelope a black pen, his pale hand steady as he pointed to the old deed of the estate. This house has always been yours, Penelope, he said. Your father left it to you, and my family has only been holding the keys until you were ready to take your place. Penelope took the pen in her hand, looking at the document that bore her true name in large letters. She looked at Blair, who was weeping in the chair, and then at the pale king who had risked his own name to save her from the dark kitchen. She signed her name at the bottom of the paper with a firm hand, ending the 15 years of hiding with one clean stroke. Blair left Oak Ridge Manor 2 days later, moving to a small house near the coast with a small amount of money Caspian provided for her support. She left without a sound, like an old shadow leaving a room when the morning sun comes in. Penelope did not move into the grandest bedroom immediately. She preferred to stay in a quiet room on the second floor that looked out toward the high mountain trees. The servants began to bow to her when she passed down the halls, but she treated them with the same kindness she had wanted when she worked in the kitchen. She paid for the kitchen boy's family to move to the valley and gave Mrs. Higgins a new set of warm clothes for the winter. The big stone house began to feel lighter and warmer, as if the old walls were finally breathing after a long sleep. Caspian stayed at his own manor across the valley, giving her the space she needed to learn how to run her new estate. He did not write long letters or bring fine gifts from the city. He simply came over twice a week to walk the mountain trails with her. They still carried the white falcon, frost on their gloves, enjoying the quiet companionship that had started in the old birdhouse. They spoke about the timber logs, the cold mountain weather, and the future of the valley people who depended on their farms. Caspian told her about his long life in the darkness and the loneliness he felt before she arrived to hum that old song. Penelope listened with her hazel eyes wide, understanding the pain of being invisible in a world full of people who did not see the real person inside. The winter months passed away slowly, the white snow melting into green grass as the mountain summer arrived in Silver Valley. The high ridges were covered in bright wildflowers, and the air smelled of sweet pine needles and warm earth. Penelope and Caspian stood on the top of the same hill, where they had first let the white falcon fly into the gray winter sky months ago. Frost circled high above their heads in the bright blue air, a small speck of white against the sun as he hunted. Your father would be happy to see you standing here today, Penelope, Caspian said, turning his pale face toward her with a rare smile. You have brought life back to this old stone house. Penelope reached out and took his hand, finding it warm despite his cold nature. I did not do it alone, Caspian, she said softly, looking into his gray eyes. You opened the heavy door for me, and you stayed by my side when I was afraid to walk through it. Caspian pulled her closer to his side, his white hair catching the bright summer light as he looked down at her face. I am asking you to share this land with me forever, as my wife and my equal, he said. She did not need to think about her answer, because her heart had known the truth since the day the white bird landed on her arm. Yes, Caspian, she whispered, and he lifted her glove to his lips with a quiet joy that filled the empty space between them. Their wedding was a small affair in the valley church, attended only by the local people and the servants who loved them. Years passed over the mountain valley like clouds moving across the sky, bringing new seasons and new life to Oak Ridge Manor. They had a young son with his father's clear gray eyes and his mother's red hair, whom they named Arthur after the grandfather he would never see. The boy loved to ride on his father's broad shoulders through the green fields, pointing at the sky whenever a white bird flew past. Penelope stood at the large glass window of her drawing room one quiet evening, watching her husband and son walk across the lawn in the twilight. She could hear the deep sound of Caspian's laugh coming through the cool air, a sound that was regular now instead of rare. She thought about the old days when she was just a kitchen maid named Daisy, scrubbing the stone floors in the dark. The memory of the hard work in the cold rooms did not make her angry anymore. It was simply the path that had brought her to this warm room. She had learned that staying quiet could be a strength, that a simple melody could tame a wild heart, and that true love was built slowly, stone by stone, like the walls of her home. The future looked bright and peaceful as the stars began to appear over the mountain peaks, lighting the way for the family she had found in the dark.